All right, it's 1 o'clock here. So I think we'll get started. Thank you for everyone for coming today. My name is Patrick Hill. I'm one of the founders here at TriplePoint. If you've been to webinars before, you're probably familiar with me because I give probably a little over half of them. Thanks for coming. Hope you enjoy this. Today we're going to talk about Lagoon total nitrogen. So this is part of our Masterclass series. We have a total of about 12 to 15 modules planned and designed to take us kind of from the beginning of Lagoon basics all the way through to data analysis and troubleshooting. And so this is actually our fourth point on here, part of all of our tracks. We'll be doing this, obviously, we had last week, we had my colleague Brady give a webinar on ammonia, Lagoon ammonia. I'm doing total nitrogen, and then on Thursday I'll do phosphorus. And then come in the spring, conveniently for the summer, we're going to focus on algae and duckweed because that's obviously a really big part of Lagoon treatment. And then finally next fall, I'll probably wrap up our series with data analysis and troubleshooting. So if you want to see some of the previous Masterclass modules that we've done, you can go to our Lagoon University site, which is on our website, lagoons.com. Go up to resources at the top, click down, you'll see Lagoon University there, and you can watch all of the different courses that we have in certain states where we have CUs for all those courses, including this one today. So super good, and once we get it all done, you'll be able to watch it start to finish and get, you'll be a certified Lagoonatic at that point. So Lagoon total nitrogen. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but total nitrogen is one of these nutrients that of concern for the Environmental Protection Agency and for your state level environmental protection agencies. And one of the big reasons for that is because those nutrients obviously have an environmental impact. And one of the big impacts they have, if you're within the Mississippi watershed that ultimately leads down the Gulf of Mexico, is the dead zone off the Gulf of Mexico, which is kind of an image up here. So that's why this is of concern. That's why we're here talking about this today, and I'll talk a little bit more detail of what the actual impact of the nutrients are, but this kind of gives you some context. So today we're going to talk about the overview of different nutrients, look at nitrogen specifically, why it's regulated, look at some options for removing nitrogen if you need to, what the conditions need to be to do that nitrogen removal biologically, and then ultimately look at a case study of where we did this here locally so you can get an idea. So of all the nutrients that we see, the regulators are really focused on three. So nitrogen, phosphorus, well, really mainly nitrogen and phosphorus, and then there also is carbon, right? So within nitrogen, we have the different forms which we go through. Nitrogen's a nutrient, it fertilizes plant growth, which we'll talk about. Then we have phosphorus, which I'll talk about on Thursday. We have three different types of phosphorus that make up total phosphorus. And what those cause in terms of they're also a nutrient that fertilizes plant growth. We've obviously got carbon, right, which is your BOD, your primary source of what's coming into your plant that you've probably already been treating for years. So that's also a nutrient. You have potassium, sulfur, and micronutrients, which are sort of like the base level things: iron, manganese, zinc, the base trace elements that every element needs, or every microbial species needs, including ourselves, to exist. So this is the sort of total world of nutrients today. Obviously, we're going to focus on nitrogen. So nitrogen has several different forms. One is this ammonia form, which is made up of NH3 and H4, which is ionized and unionized ammonia. Then what we have is called nitrite and nitrate. And then finally, organic nitrogen. And organic nitrogen, tends to be a relatively small percentage of what comes into a plant. In fact, most of the nitrogen that comes into a municipal wastewater treatment plant tends to be in the ammonia form. And so when we're getting rid of total nitrogen, it's typically where we start. And by the time it gets out the back end of your plant, the question is it in a different form or is it not there at all? All of these together are total nitrogen. So total nitrogen, as it kind of makes sense, it's like ammonia nitrogen plus nitrite plus nitrate plus organic nitrogen. So it's all three or all four components there together. There's different, the ways they categorize it and term it. You won't necessarily get this on your permit necessarily, but there's something called TKN or total Kendall nitrogen. And so this is just the combination between organic nitrogen and ammonia nitrogen. Oftentimes you can kind of, you can figure out what your organic nitrogen is by asking for a TKN, asking for an ammonia, and then taking away the ammonia from the TKN number, and what you're left with is organic nitrogen. That's typically kind of where you see it. The other forms that we see are what's called total inorganic nitrogen. And this is a useful one because organic nitrogen, like organic phosphorus, is kind of a hard one to treat for. The microbial community won't necessarily attack it directly. They'll kind of attack it indirectly. So what you have here is total inorganic nitrogen, which is just looking at the nitrogen you can actually treat for. So ammonia plus nitrite plus nitrate. So in our state, Colorado, the CDPHE regulates total inorganic nitrogen. They don't regulate total nitrogen because they kind of understand that the organic component of nitrogen is not something you can do a lot about, right? And so, like I said, of the total nitrogen coming into your plant, most of it is in this ammonia form. Maybe only 1 or 2% of it is in the organic form when it comes in, or it can be higher at times, but by the time it leaves its plant, it can be a lot less. So why is it regulated? Well, there's sort of three main reasons that nitrogen and total nitrogen might be regulated. One is, ammonia in and of itself is toxic to a fish and invertebrates that constitute the basis of the food chain, right, within aquatic ecosystems. So it'd be like us taking a cyanide pill is kind of what like ammonia is in the water to those species. So that's one reason. The second one is eutrophication. And so that is basically a fancy way of saying that you are putting fertilizers in water that then cause an excess amount of aquatic plant growth, so algae, for example. So eutrophication can lead to these algae blooms. There's things called HABs, or harmful algae blooms, which are like super toxic to amphibious life, very toxic to humans. Oftentimes, certain swimming areas you might go to are closed because of harmful algae blooms. So they really have a very nasty effect on the ecosystem. And then you can also get hypoxia or oxygen depleted conditions as a result of this eutrophication. And so the biggest example of this is, and this is the reason that a lot of lagoon systems that are within the Mississippi watershed that ultimately leads down to the Gulf of Mexico, is that there's this massive dead zone off the coast where you've got hypoxic, low oxygen conditions, eutrophication in some areas where you would say the ecosystem is dead, right? Because all of the nitrogen coming off and phosphorus coming off the farm fields and from wastewater plants and so on is all leading down to the Gulf of Mexico. The final reason it would be regulated is that nitrates themselves can be, if they find their way to our groundwater, can be toxic, and so to humans, right, if we drink them. Specifically babies. There's something called blue baby syndrome, which is really, really, obviously not good. So yeah, I'd say these are all the reasons. I'd say of all these reasons, I think the first two are probably the biggest ones that are of impact, but certainly there's probably more reasons as well. So where does ammonia come from? Sorry, where does nitrogen come from? So nitrogen comes from human sources. So the ammonia that gets into our system primarily comes from our urine, but it also can be flushed down the drain from cleaning products, for example, tend to have a lot of ammonia in them that we might use around the house. We have industries like food processors will put nitrogen into their waste streams. There's certain types of industries that make fertilizers, for example, or industries that make bombs. They actually create nitrates, that they have nitrate plants, basically. And if you're a municipal system and you have an industry feeding into your influence stream, that could be of impact, right, to the amount of nitrogen that you have coming in. There's infiltration and inflow. So, every wastewater collection system, especially municipally, tends to have infiltration. You're probably familiar with it. That's where the groundwater seeps into, or the water around the pipes seeps into the pipes themselves. This is particularly seen when you have high rain events and it spikes what's coming in. Well, what's in that water ultimately ends up at the plants as well. So I had a customer a few years ago who, like many lagoons, is in the middle of agricultural land, right? And their collection system pipes all run right past, agricultural land. And it was so odd because they would have about 20% less ammonia in the summertime coming into their plant than in the wintertime. And the only reason I could kind of figure it was that they might have been getting some infiltration from the farm fields. Obviously the farmers are putting fertilizer on the fields, some of that fertilizer has ammonia and nitrogen in it. That is obviously seeping its way into the pipes and ultimately ending up at the plant. That was my theory. Never got a chance to actually prove that, but this is where it can come in from I&I. Final source is the lagoon itself. So, lagoons are kind of a nutrient sink in a lot of ways. We're settling solids, right? Those solids eventually will accumulate over time, and those solids can have phosphorus and nitrogen in them. We also grow algae, so that phosphorus and nitrogen and whatever's coming into the plant and what's in the solids will fuel an algae bloom, right? Some of that algae will flow out of the system, but some of it remains in the system and dies, right? And that then sinks down to the bottom and adds to the sort of nutrients that are sitting on the bottom, right? So these things can feed back at certain times a year. We have a whole module on lagoon biosolids, so I'm not going to go into it here, but there's something called benthol feedback where those nutrients that are in the sludge or those nutrients that are accumulated over time will actually re-release into the water column. And then obviously we have birds and other wildlife that can come in and poop in the pond and add phosphorus and nutrients like that. We've all seen the geese. Geese love that open water. So the current state of regulation is obviously it varies state by state. So if I lick my finger and put it up in the air and try to see which way the wind's blowing, it's really what I'm trying to tell you here. But if you're in Canada, you have federal toxicity requirements. So they require that operators take a sample of their lagoon water and literally put trout in it to see if they die, right? And so that forces ammonia requirements. In the Midwest, specifically within Iowa, for example, every stream is mandated to be fishable and swimmable, right? So that's driving ammonia requirements. And then anything really in the Gulf of Mexico watershed, right? And beyond, you're seeing this push towards total nitrogen and nitrogen requirements, whether that's ammonia being kind of, in a lot of cases, the first step to that, which is, hey, we're going to ask you not to put cyanide into the water, for the fish, right, which is ammonia. But eventually we know that nitrogen's a nutrient and that we're going to have to actually ask you to get rid of the nitrogen entirely. General through line here is that, it's anticipated, most regulators that I've talked to in most places I've been across the country, that eventually the limits will be 10 TN and a 1 total phosphorus. So 10 total nitrogen, 1 total phosphorus. It's kind of like the long run projection. But again, this hasn't happened yet in a lot of places, so it's extremely hard to tell what's going to happen. So if you need to meet a total nitrogen limit, or you're thinking you might need to in the future, here are some possible options, and we'll talk through each of these. You can go to land application, construct a wetlands, you can replace your lagoon, or you could upgrade your lagoon. So it's kind of standard set here. So land application. So in my early days in my career, when I left college and I was all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and still had a romantic sense of the world, just kidding. I used to work for a civil engineering firm that actually designed and built lagoon-based wastewater treatment systems, primarily for communities that didn't have one, or little subdivisions that were built outside of a service area of a local municipality, right? And the way this firm used to design them was it would be an aerated lagoon system followed by storage ponds with land application, right? So that's where you're cleaning the water, right? You're filtering, disinfecting, you're storing it in a big storage cell, then you're using the water for irrigation. In a lot of cases, the irrigation's on farm fields, sort of non-edible crops. In this case, this picture here on the left, this was actually a golf course. So the beauty of this is you're kind of avoiding the compliance issues, right? So you're taking those nutrients and you're irrigating them onto a growing crop that is then obviously taking up those nutrients, and you don't have to meet a limit for those things, in essence. Now I say that sometimes there are requirements around, you can only apply so many pounds of nitrogen per year, or per month, or per day, or whatever the requirements are, but substantially it's seen to avoid a lot of the actual effluent requirements. It's fairly low mechanical equipment in comparison to other options. If you're then using reuse water, right, from a wastewater plant, as opposed to using fresh water to irrigate that same land, you're obviously saving on the freshwater source, so that's good, right? And then it can also reduce the fertilizers because there's obviously natural nutrients in that growing crop. So all of these sort of benefits makes a lot of sense. And I actually did, at one point, I did a whole entire webinar on land application. I'm not sure if it's on the university or not, but it can be a really good basis if you're interested in learning more, because I had a decent amount of experience. The downsides are it requires land, right? So the storage lagoons require land. The irrigation space requires land. In some instances, the municipalities need to own the land that they're irrigating on. And I'd say the big thing with that is that, it's highly important that you have the land to actually land apply. Otherwise, you won't be able to get rid of your water. And the only way to really guarantee you can have the land to land apply is to own it yourself, right? So I've definitely seen scenarios where, they have leased the land, for example, they have an agreement with a farmer and they get their whole irrigation system set up around this agreement, and then it falls apart and the farmer doesn't want to take the water anymore, right? So in a lot of cases, they just go and buy the farmland themselves, right? So that's a big thing, right? Having a really, really good place to actually land apply that you can consistent use. Irrigation itself, the prospect of having the water, the prospect of getting rid of the water every year and land applying it is an operator intensive business. I worked at this company probably for 5+ years in the same office as the operators of these plants, this particular plant. And it was always every year they're getting into fall and they're like, crap, we got to get rid of this water because you can't store infinite amount of water, right? And so you also can't irrigate when it's raining, right? You can't irrigate when there's high groundwater. There's all these regulations about when you can and cannot irrigate in order to get rid of the water. So it really becomes it's not an operator easy solution. You also have to maintain the irrigation system itself, which is not always, you know, a walk in the park, right? So at this golf course, for example, they constantly had irrigation heads that were clogging, right? And so it is an operator intensive thing. I would consider an operator intensive thing. It is local regulation dependent as to whether you can get it, whether you can, obviously if you're irrigating, I have a customer who's going to land apply in Wyoming right now. They're being sued because they are quote unquote irrigating with raw wastewater, according to the suit, which isn't true at all. It's treated wastewater. It's on a field of a non-irrigable crop. It's not going to touch anybody, but you know, there's a lot of that NIMBY, not my backyard type of attitude about this sometimes. And then, you know, the effluent filtering, disinfection, and fencing can be a requirement. So in Illinois, where this plant is, they could irrigate on the golf course with no fencing or anything, but they had to filter and disinfect. So that's additional equipment. If you didn't filter and disinfect and you were on a more generalized, you know, piece of farmland, then you had to have fencing around the irrigation space. So definitely some requirements there that obviously add some expense. Constructed wetlands. So with the constructed wetlands approach, what you're doing is you're treating it through your plant, and then you've got literally you're constructing wetlands on the back that you're then feeding your effluent into a very large space. So this system here is one of the largest systems we've ever done. We just did the aerated lagoon at the front. It's a 7 million gallon day facility down in Mississippi, and they have all this additional constructed wetlands. So this big pond here is our primary treatment pond, and then all these little ponds are all areas of constructed wetland. And the idea here is you're running your effluent through, the nutrients are being soaked up, right, by the growing plant within the wetlands, and then by the time you lead to your actual discharge point, you've let Mother Nature do all the work for you, right, from a nutrient removal standpoint. So it can be effective. I've seen it be effective at different sites. Low energy, obviously, very natural aesthetic to these wetlands, which is kind of nice, fairly low maintenance once you get them constructed. Downside is you do have a lot of land requirements. You really have to build these wetlands very, very big. You get seasonal performance variability. So obviously, if it's cold, plants aren't going to grow as well. They're not going to consume as many nutrients versus if it's warmer. I think that's why we don't see constructed wetlands in the north part of the country here, rarely at all, is this seasonal variability in their performance. Some do require some maintenance. I've seen them not be effective on the basis of requiring maintenance. And then they can be a potential mosquito haven. So again, this one, maybe if you're in the South, it's something worth considering if you've got extra land around you. I'm not sure as to the performance of these systems as to what kind of ultimate limits they can achieve for a constructed wetland system. It's not something obviously we've dug into or that we do, but it is definitely an option. So let's talk about biological total nitrogen reduction, right? And so this is where most plants do it, right? This is where mechanical plants, this is how mechanical plants do it. This is how lagoons potentially could do it, how we've seen lagoons do it. There's two steps to this. So if you were on the webinar last week, we talked a lot about nitrification, right? And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on nitrification here, but what you have to understand is that when you're nitrifying, you're taking the ammonia nitrogen, which again is the majority of what's coming into your plant, you're converting it to nitrate, and then you're converting it to nitrate, right? And so you're using different bugs to do that, and you're taking nitrogen in one form that is ammonia that's more toxic to amphibious life, and you're converting it into nitrate, which is another form which is less toxic to amphibious life. However, you have not actually got rid of the nitrogen. It's just in a different form than when it came into the plant. Then what you need to do is what's called denitrification. So that's where you take the nitrate and you convert it into nitrogen gas. That's where you get the TN removal, right? The total nitrogen removal. So the tricky part of this is that because most of your nitrogen coming into your plant comes in the ammonia form, you have to nitrify first. And so what do you need to nitrify? You need low BOD, alkalinity, ammonia, and high dissolved oxygen, right? And again, I'm not going into great lengths of detail of how to nitrify here, but these are some of the key things. Then you start looking at denitrification, and you start looking at that and you say, well, what do I need for that? Well, I need high BOD because I actually need to grow the bugs, the heterotrophic bacteria that consume the bugs, in order to denitrify, because there's the ones that denitrify. And I need that BOD to be a carbon source for the denitrification process. Okay. I also need low dissolved oxygen, and I also need nitrates. So you start to see how much of a chicken and egg situation this is, right? I got all of my nitrogen in ammonia form, so I need to convert that into nitrate, okay, before I can denitrify. But the conditions I need to nitrify are totally different than the conditions I need to denitrify, in some ways opposite of those conditions. So it really creates a difficult situation. So what are your options? Well, you could go to a mechanical plant. Things like SBRs have aerobic modes, anaerobic or anoxic modes that create the conditions necessary, right, to denitrify and nitrify in the same basin. Sounds cool. The issue with that is I think that it's very high capital cost. So most of the lagoon replacement jobs that we've seen come out are 2 or 3 times the cost of lagoon upgrades. You vastly increase the operational complexity of your wastewater treatment process, right? You've gone from, a lagoon with maybe 5 to 6 different mechanical parts that need to be maintained to a mechanical plant with probably 20, 30, 40, 50 different mechanical parts that need to be maintained. And you have a much more complex process from a treatment standpoint as well. You end up needing more staff, you need more time to maintain this equipment and maintain this process. Your overall operation maintenance cost is at least double typically, and a higher operator license is required. So for all these reasons, I think, you're talking to the lagoon guys, so maybe I'm a little skewed on this one for my own personal belief, but we believe lagoons do it better. And so we're always looking for, how do we get this old dog to do new tricks, right? And how do we get lagoons to be able to do this? So that's where a lot of our focus has been. So the first option here is a post-anoxic reactor. So this is a facility that we built recently. You have your influent lagoon here at the front where all your aerators are. Water comes in, you got Lagoon 1, treats BOD, Lagoon 2, polishes BOD, then it goes into this nitrox reactor system. So this is a nitrification reactor. So we're lowering the BOD, get that low BOD. We're then going into the nitrox, the nitrification reactor. That is raising the DO, that's fostering the growth of nitrifying bacteria, which is then nitrifying, right? Converting the ammonia that came into the nitrate that we need to denitrify. And then we're running it through a denitrification reactor directly after, where we're seeking to foster the growth of denitrifying bacteria in order to get rid of the nitrate and turn it into nitrogen gas. So these literally, on a post reactor like this, they literally piggyback right next to each other. So you have this one big tank with separate walls, basically, as you can see here in this illustration. This is sort of a side view. So your nitrification reactors have the aerators in them. The denitrification reactor has a mixer to keep the water mixed, has media in it like the nitrification reactors do to foster the growth of the bacteria, and that's being mixed around within the tank itself. And then what we do, because as I mentioned earlier, we need we need BOD, right? We need BOD to foster the growth of the heterotrophic bacteria that we didn't want in the previous reactor because they take away from the nitrification process. We need BOD available as a carbon source for the denitrification process, right? It actually needs that. And so what we have to do is we have to meter it in, basically. We have a big tank like this. It can sit indoors often, and we're actually pumping. We're buying liquid BOD. In this case, it's a product called Micro C, which is actually provided by one of our sister companies, EOSI. They're the leader, I think, in providing that type of product. And you have your metering pump, and you're metering this Micro C into the tank, which is your liquid BOD, and you're controlling that via the use of a dissolved oxygen probe. So as I mentioned earlier, you want your dissolved oxygen within the reactor to be about 0.5. You want low DO. And then, so you're feeding to kind of get that low DO. So you're feeding BOD to grow the heterotrophic bacteria, which then consume the oxygen and lower it so that it can get down to 0.5 milligrams per liter necessary for anoxic conditions and ultimately denitrification to exist. And then you're also using a nitrate probe as well. So obviously coming out of your reactor, you have a lot of nitrates because you just converted all your ammonia to nitrates. You're flowing it into the denitrification reactor. If you have high nitrates, you're going to feed more Micro C. If you've got low nitrates, you feed less. So that's how the process works. This is this overall view of the tank itself. As you can see here, these two tanks are the nitrification reactors. This is denite. Obviously pre-startup, there's no water in these tanks right now, but this is just a picture of it. You know, we found that this system can meet compliance requirements. One of the benefits of it is you can really control the process within the system itself, which is nice. It's, you know, I think sometimes with lagoons, it's hard to control the process because you've got so much water in the lagoon that, you know, there's nothing, no variables or valves you can turn or things you can change, right? But in reactors like this, you can control the carbon feed, you can control the mixing, you can control the different things, right? Which is cool. And it can be just added on to an existing nitrification system. So like we've done a lot of facility planning where the customer has a need to meet an ammonia limit today, and they're like, well, what if I get total nitrogen in 5 years? And we're like, well, you can just add this post-anoxic reactor on later, and boom, you got your total nitrogen removal, right? So it's kind of a nice sort of bolt-on system if you need it. The downside, I'd say, is in doing this and our experience with it, it's tricky. It's a tricky process because you end up with high DO coming out of your tanks, your nitrification tanks. You're trying to lower the DO in the denite reactor, and you're adding carbon, and you're just trying to maintain like this kind of delicate balance between adding enough carbon that you depress the dissolved oxygen, but not adding too much carbon that you end up getting BOD essentially that's flowing downstream that then you have to remove, right? And getting the nitrates to be reduced, right? So I'll perfectly admit the fact that this is a tricky one from an operations standpoint to really maintain. On an ongoing basis, there's also the carbon cost, right? So depending on how many nitrates you have, you're going to need to add more carbon. You're going to have that additional chem cost, basically. And then the instrumentation needs to be maintained with the system, right? I'd say the biggest, we've done lots of instrumentation in the past. We were just actually literally having a meeting about 30 minutes ago about how the probe, the nitrate probe not at this site or at a different site's not reading correctly, and it needs to be recalibrated, right? And so like this instrumentation requires regular maintenance to work effectively. It needs to be calibrated frequently, et cetera. And a lot of times as a lagoon operator, you're running around like a chicken with your head cut off, right? You're plowing the streets because you had a big snowfall in the wintertime, and you're mowing the parks, and you're catching the dogs and cats that are running around town or whatever, right? So it's a lot, and so this is a relatively, for a lagoon, on the higher side of maintenance. Okay, so realizing the complications of the post-denitrification reactor and how amazing yet it is sort of maybe a little bit more than we would like to have from an operations standpoint. We decided to find a better way, and that's what we tend to do around here, is try to find a better way to do things, especially for our beloved lagoon owners and engineers. So we came up with this idea of recirculation denitrification. So what is this? So what it means, very simply, is we're going to take the water that's nitrified, right? So assuming you're nitrifying your water, you're taking that ammonia, which is your primary influent source of nitrogen, and you're converting it into nitrate. We want to get that nitrate, and we want to send that water back to the front of your lagoon system. And why do we want to do that? Because that's where we have lower dissolved oxygen, and we have influent BOD coming in. We have free BOD, the stuff that we're trying to treat for anyway. It's sitting right there for us to use, right? This works, and I'll go through a case study of how well this works, but some of the other benefits of recirculating, and I did a whole presentation on lagoon recirculation, so in the Masterclass series, so it's awesome, you'll learn about these, but it reduces BOD, TSS, algae, does a lot of really great things for you. In fact, I'm not some genius, and Triple Point, we're pretty smart around here, but I wouldn't say we're geniuses. We didn't come up with the idea of recirculating. This has been done in activated sludge or more mechanical type systems for years, for decades. It's a great effect, right? Makes total sense, right? Take something where you don't have the conditions that you want and put it somewhere else where you do have the conditions you want in order to get what you want, right? I think one of the things that people get confused on the recirculation side is like, wow, well, if we're recirculating water, are we reducing the amount of time the water sits in the lagoon, right? Sort of like circular logic. And the short answer to this question is no, we're not, because the fundamental equation for determining how many days the water sits in your lagoon system is the influent flow divided by the lagoon volume. And when we recirculate, we're not increasing the influent flow, and we're not decreasing the lagoon volume. We're not doing any of the above. We're just moving water from within the plant to a different location and sending it in a circle, right? And so the HRT, or hydraulic retention time, strictly speaking, remains exactly the same. So this shows you the process here. Again, this is our process. We've worked on this and kind of perfected it a little bit. Certainly any recirculation, as long as you're nitrifying, right, and you can take those nitrates from the back of the plant and put to the front, you could certainly do that, right? But this is the way we do it. So we actually like to have a pre-anoxic lagoon right at the front of the plant. Then we run through our aerated lagoons. In this situation, we're showing the anoxic lagoon simply separated from the aerated portion of the lagoon with a baffle curtain, so it can really be that simple. Then we run through our nitrification reactor, right? Which is down here on the right side of the screen. This is obviously taking the ammonia from ammonia to nitrate. Then we're recirculating using this pump station here and blending that recirculated water with the influent water and putting it back in the anoxic lagoon itself. So you might be asking, blending, you say, why would we want to blend? Well, blending does a number of things for us. And so we actually, I learned this because I found that, that obviously we've got influent BOD coming in from the collection system. So that's good. We want to get the nitrates in contact with that influent BOD, which is naturally growing the heterotrophic bugs, right, that then want to denitrify. We also have low dissolved oxygen in that influent stream, so that's awesome, right? We also have warmer water in that influent stream coming in versus what's being recirculated, so that's great. We're actually increasing the temperature of the water, which we know increases microbial activity. And I have a theory that the water being in the pipe creates this very, very nice condition where we actually might get some denitrification in the pipe. And the reason I have that is because we actually did this study here, this picture, for a plant that actually creates nitrates in order to build bombs, TNT. And they actually had a spill of nitrates that they had to clean up before they could discharge the water, and they rented 2 tanks from us. So the tank on the left was the nitrification tank, the tank on the right was a denitrification tank. And we ran into the problems that I was speaking about earlier, where we come out of the nitrification tank fully nitrified, lots of nitrates, but really high DO, and then we run it into the denitrification tank, and it'd be like, oh man, we can't get this DO down, it's difficult to control the process. We were getting some denitrification in this tank, but we weren't getting all the amount that we needed to get the really, really low limit that they required. However, once it flowed out of the back of that second tank on the right-hand side in that picture, what we found was between the back of that tank and the ultimate discharge point into a storage pond, they were getting a ton of nitrate removal. They were getting like almost 10 to 20 milligrams per liter of nitrate removal. So somehow that denitrification occurred in the pipe itself. So that's why I came up with this idea of blending, and I think it works really well. So some of the benefits of recirculation, talked about, again, the BOD reduction, TSS reduction, algae reduction, but directly related to denitrification, you get 2 main benefits. First of all, for every 1 milligram per liter of nitrate denitrified, you get 3.57 milligrams per liter of alkalinity that's added back into your wastewater stream. So that's really helpful for nitrification. So that's why we really like that. Secondly, for every 1 milligram per liter of nitrate denitrified, we reduce BOD by 2.5 milligrams per liter. And we do this without adding any oxygen at all, right? So I like to call this free denitrification, sorry, free BOD removal, which is awesome, right? So in some cases, if you're struggling to meet a BOD limit, for example, you could remove almost up to 65 milligrams per liter by denitrifying, just by doing that. So I often recommend people denitrify, even if they don't have a total nitrogen limit, because sometimes they need alkalinity, right? And they're having to, their influent water doesn't have enough to nitrify, right? So they're actually feeding alkalinity. And in other cases, their BOD is too high and they're busting their BOD permit, right? And they're like, okay, well, if I denitrify, I actually get rid of more BOD that way, just by popping a pump in, right? So super, super cool aspect of this denitrification. So Oak Creek, this is a system, Rocky Mountains, Colorado, got a total inorganic nitrogen limit. So similar to a total nitrogen limit, basically the same thing, of 13, about 0.4 MGD, needed our help, right? Weren't able to meet it with their lagoon. They actually had an existing nitrification reactor, so that was awesome, and they were meeting their ammonia limit just fine. So this was their process. They had they recycled the effluent from the nitrification reactor, blended it in the influent building with the influent water coming in. That then flowed into a pre-anoxic lagoon that had a mixer in it. This is our kitschy slapped together Jethro mixer unit, which is pretty cool. It'll be better. We're working on it, but it worked great actually. Then we went in. They go into these aerated lagoons, then nitrification, then polishing, and then recirc again. Right. So that was their process. We did this initially. We've done this as a demonstration project. So everything on here it's a full-scale demonstration, basically a pilot. To prove that it could work. This picture up here with the red building, this is where the effluent to the reactor, from the reactor goes into this effluent well here, which is then pumped out by 4 separate 120 volt half horsepower pumps, then gets pulled together, goes through a flow meter, and then we had a splitter valve if we needed it. It all flows back to the front to the influent building here, which is this red building. And this is our flow meter reading, which was about, it hovers between 90 and 100 GPM, which is basically just it's about 1 times their average daily flow. So here are the results. So pre us working on this, they have a TIN limit of 13. Their future TIN limit is probably going to be 10. Again, that kind of falls in line with kind of finger in the air analysis that I told you earlier. Of most lagoons probably get a 10 TN limit at some point in the future. And so that's really what we're shooting for, right? We started this in sort of late summer, early fall 2021. Started with just a simple recirculation pump from the back of the reactor to the front of the pre-anoxic lagoon, and then kind of amp that up by pumping the water all the way back to the front, which took us, I don't know, better part of 2 months to construct a system that pumped it back to the front. But as soon as we did that, we start to see some really good results. And that's sort of representative of this kind of dip here. But then as we got into winter, you could see the results started to jump back up closer to their limit. And the reason for that was the water temperature got colder. So we're like, okay, we got to do something about this. Initially, I was kind of like, okay, let's just leave this. Maybe it's just a couple of data points. We got 3-4 data points into this, and we're like, okay, we need to do something more. So what we did was, around the beginning of February that particular year, we added a mixer. And if you know anything about wastewater treatment, mixing is always a good thing, right? Mixing gets the food, the bug, and everything to mix together. And so that's where we plopped in our mixer, and we saw to see amazing drop in the total into the total inorganic nitrogen. So it really dropped down here over the course of that year, and it's really stayed well under their 13 limit, and in a lot of cases under their 10 on the 10 target that we had for this plant, despite some operational hiccups here and there and things like that I won't go into. So it's been a really, really big success, and Oak Creek's actually going to implement a full-scale system, permanent system here in the next couple of years. They're under compliance order with the CDPHE to do that. So we're really excited about the results, and we believe this will be replicable across multiple sites. So I'd say the big thing here with this is that, you know, recirculated denitrification is a really low cost upgrade. That's one of the biggest benefits of it in my mind. You do need to nitrify. So you do have to nitrify. You have to have nitrites in order to denitrify. And if you're trying to get a total nitrogen limit, right, you have to nitrify first. So assuming you are already nitrifying in one way, shape, or form, this is a really low cost upgrade. You add a pump station, you pump it back to the front, you add a little mixer in the first pond. Like, it's, from an infrastructure standpoint, it's really, really easy. Really low O&M. The recirculation system stays on. Typically, it's at a constant speed, constantly recirculating water. And I mean, the operator here doesn't do a whole lot. I mean, he does more testing analysis. He runs colorimeter samples for us every week because he's required to by the CDPHE, but it's very consistent in terms of its results. Obviously, you don't have the additional carbon, right? So you're not paying for that additional cost. You're using the natural carbon and coming in from the influent, which is great. And you can regularly meet under 10 in our analysis here. Like, you saw some of those data points above 10. However, most of those were due to operational hiccups. There are a few sources of bypass within the Oak Creek system, which are unusual to Oak Creek. And so in reality, like, we're going to tighten all that stuff up when we go to put the full scale system in, and they should be well under 10 through this system. And we're going to see how low we can really get it. So we feel really confident with that 10 number. The downside is, you know, I'd say, can you get this down, the nitrates down to lower limits like 5 milligrams per liter or less? I don't know. I think, you know, when you start to recirculate, you know, assuming you can, let's say, remove 50% of the nitrates every time you recirculate, like you're doing 50% of 20 is 10, and then 50% of 10 is 5, and then so on and so forth, you start to run into some limitations as to how much you can truly recirculate and maintain the same process, right? So it can be kind of a tricky math game to figure out how low you can go. We're certainly going to see, but right now I would say I wouldn't sell a system that would achieve any less than 10 milligrams per liter TN at this point in time. Maybe the max theoretical removal is 5, but if you have that kind of limit, chances are you don't want to just recirculate. And then also the downside, like I said, you really do have to nitrify first. So like even if you're in the South, right, you might nitrify 10 months out of the year, 11 months out of the year, but if you miss 1 month where all of your nitrogen gets stuck in that ammonia form, you can't denitrify nitrates that don't exist, right? You have to nitrify first, right? So you definitely need a nitrification system or some way of nitrifying. So another alternative here is, if you have to meet a really low limit, you could do pre and post. So this is actually what we're doing at this facility in Wyoming, where we have a pre-anoxic lagoon here at the front, right? And we're using, these aren't aerators, these are burpers. So these will just burst air for mixing occasionally. We have a baffle curtain. Then we've got our area lagoons here, nitrification reactor, post denit reactor after the nitrification, and then we also recirculate water back to the front. So you kind of get the best of both worlds by doing this, right? And that we believe will probably be able to achieve nitrates in the 5 type of range when we're controlling the process, combining the 2 technologies together. Most people don't have a limit of 5 though. So just an overall look at all the different systems we looked at. From a mechanical plant, you certainly get under 5 TN potentially with that. Most expensive option, land application and constructed wetlands follow behind that. You effectively have no limit. Sometimes you have pounds per day requirements around how much you can land apply, but I'm just going to say no limit here. If you do post-inoculant reactor, you can get under 5, but it's a little about the same cost as constructed wetlands and land app. Recirculation denite is by far the lowest cost and can get you under 10, and then pre and post around the same as the other ones in terms of cost, but will get you under 5. So it really depends on what your limit's at, but this scorecard's kind of a useful overall rule of thumb of everything I considered here option. So with that, thanks for coming today. I'll open up to questions. Before I do so, if you want to email me or give me a call, my number's here on the screen. I'm happy to answer any questions you have in regards to anything Lagoon related. We're always happy to help, regardless of whether it's something we can ultimately work with you on or not. I'm happy to give you my opinion. I've been doing this for 17 years, so I like to think I know a little bit about it. Eve will be sending you your CUs if you requested them. So she's the one to kind of get with on the CU front, and she'll send out an email after this. So, but I'll open up to any questions you have.
All right, here's the first one. Could a high recirculation rate allow influent BOD, et cetera, to be pushed towards the effluent faster, or is there sufficient volume that it doesn't matter?
Typically, there's sufficient volume that it doesn't matter. So, one of the benefits of lagoons is you got this really high retention time. So everything that comes in is essentially equalized, right? So if you have 30 days of retention, you're really equalizing 30 days of the influent that's come in. So the reaction rate on BOD removal is high enough and fast enough that reducing it even by half isn't going to make any difference to the overall treatment. In fact, you get better treatment because you're taking the BOD that would have otherwise been discharged and you're sending it back to the front and giving the bugs at the front more food to eat, which then promotes the microbial growth, which then makes it faster because you have more mouths to feed, more bugs, a bigger and more diverse microbial community.
If the water is recycled, will it change the definition of a lagoon and change the permit status from a lagoon to a mechanical plant?
No, I never heard that. Never heard that before. No, I mean, obviously every EPA and every state level environmental agency is going to make their own determination on that, but I don't know how you can make that argument because it's still a lagoon, you're just moving water around. So CDPHE here in Colorado, certainly not. I've also talked to Missouri DNR and Iowa DNR, never heard that concern. So, I mean, again, it depends on your state, but If somebody tells you that, I'd like to discuss that with them. Put me in touch.
Is there any level of denitrification you can get out of a lagoon doing nothing?
Yes, absolutely. So there is sort of serendipitous denitrification across the lagoon system. There's lots of mechanisms for it. So algae growth, for example, algae will assimilate nitrogen into their cell wall, and if they flow out, then certainly you have that. Or if they die off and sink to the bottom, then they get sequestered in the sludge blanket, which again can rebound, but not all the time. So there's that. But yeah, definitely. I mean, I think you see like really long retention time lagoons just get very natural denitrification that occurs, which is cool. But it depends on the site and lots of other factors.
What might cause a spike in effluent ammonia when other parameters remain normal?
It's typically like it's benthol feedback. So if you watch my biosolids webinar, like I said, so the solids in the sludge. So one of the classic ones for ammonia spike would be, let's say you grow duckweed on your lagoon, and duckweed, what it does is it assimilates the ammonia into its cell wall, right, when it grows, and it sits on the top. And so often it's not discharged, right? So it just sits there, it sucks up the ammonia, and it sits there, and then it dies off in the wintertime, right? It sinks to the bottom, and then it can start to break down, right? And it breaks down and re-releases that ammonia as it breaks down on the bottom. It's called benthol feedback, and that's classic. Addition of ammonia.
Does recirculation have any effect on retention time?
No, it doesn't. Again, because so what you're doing when you're recirculating is your influent is set by the amount of water you're pumping to your lagoon system, right, coming from your collection system. And your basin size is set because obviously it doesn't change. So your hydraulic retention time remains the same with recirculation. What you do though is you are sending the water in a circle, right? Which means that if I took a gallon, right, of water and I was able to label it, right, with a serial number or something, and I watched it go through my plant, it would come in from the influent, it would get recirculated back to the front. So it would spend half the amount of time in Lagoon 1 or Lagoon 2, but it would do it twice, right? So it would be, it spent half the amount of time, but it'd do it twice. So at the end of the day, sorry, I got distracted by the balloons. Did you guys see that? The retention time is exactly the same. It's just that it's staying in the same place. It's going around twice.
Does the complexity of the recycle require operator training level increase? And kind of a side note to that, is this an automated system where it's just consistently going around and around?
So there's two ways to do it. I mean, the short answer to the question, it doesn't require. Think of it as it's a pump station, like any lift station is within your collection system, in essence. So it's exactly the same. So if they're operating pump stations, the recycle system is a pump station. It's exactly the same equipment, basically. And so there's two ways to do it. You can flow pace the pumping and automate the pumping with floats and a VFD so that you're matching the influent flow meter reading with the VFD, right? Or you just set it to a certain pumping rate, and you have floats that switch it on and off depending on the level, and it just constantly goes. But there's no regular operator attention required. I mean, it's like anything else. Like, yes, you go around, you do your rounds, you look at the lift station, you open up this, is it working, everything good, did the pump trip, did it not trip, kind of thing. But the ones at Oak Creek, I mean, they don't touch them ever. They just run constantly all the time. So it can be as simple as that, and it can also be as cool as flow pacing off an influent flow meter.
I'll say last call for questions, but in the meantime, I suspect this one will have to be answered offline. And it was, can you talk about the intricacies of Nitrobacter and Nitrosomonas?
Yeah, that'll have to be talked about offline. So again, that's the Nitrobacterus and Nitrosomonas are two nitrifying bacteria, right? So they, if you go back to Brady's webinar from last week on nitrification, he talks a little bit more detail about each of those. Yeah, so.
We're out of time.
Excellent. Well, thanks everybody for coming today.